Mike Tyson's fist connected with the man's jaw so hard the impact echoed off the concrete walls like a gunshot, dropping 240 pounds of rage to the cold prison floor before anyone could blink. The inmate had lunged at Tyson with a sharpened piece of metal, and now he lay crumpled against the wall while Iron Mike stood over him, chest heaving, knuckles split open, ready to deliver something far worse. What happened in the next 90 seconds would become Indiana Youth Center legend, a story whispered about for decades. The first punch came without warning. A fist, thick, fast, and carrying 220 pounds of coiled fury behind it, crashed into the jaw of a man named Darnell Collins, and the sound it made bounced off concrete walls in a space no bigger than a two-car garage. What happened in the next 90 seconds would become Indiana Youth Center legend, a story whispered about for decades by guards, inmates, and anyone who ever set foot inside that facility. A story only 7 people actually saw with their own eyes, and I'm going to tell you every single detail of it right now. But first, you need to understand where Mike Tyson was in his life when this happened. Not the Mike Tyson you saw on pay-per-view, not the guy with the gold belts and the mansion in Connecticut. This was a different animal. This was Mike Tyson in 1993, roughly 1 year into a 6-year sentence at the Indiana Youth Center in Plainfield, Indiana. He'd been convicted of rape, he maintained his innocence, the world had moved on. And inside those walls he was just another inmate in khaki, eating the same slop, walking the same yard, sleeping on the same thin mattress as every other man in that facility. Except he wasn't, and everybody knew it. See, here's the thing about prison. It doesn't care who you were. It cares who you are. And who Mike Tyson was in that moment was a 26-year-old man with the most famous fists on the planet, locked in a cage with men who had absolutely nothing to lose. Some of them wanted to be left alone. Some of them wanted favors. And some of them, believe me, wanted to test him. They wanted to see if the legend was real or if television had been lying to them for a decade. Darnell Collins was one of those men. Collins stood 6'3", weighed around 240, and had been locked up for armed robbery since 1989. He ran a small crew on the second tier of the housing unit. 3 guys who moved contraband, controlled phone time, and made life miserable for anyone who didn't pay tribute. Collins wasn't the biggest man in the facility. He wasn't the most connected. But he was mean in a way that made other mean men step aside. He had a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. Not from a knife fight, but from a car accident when he was 15, though he never corrected anyone who assumed otherwise. He used fear the way a mechanic uses a wrench, precisely, without emotion, and every single day. For the first few months of Tyson's incarceration, Collins kept his distance. He watched. He studied the rhythm of Tyson's days, when he went to the gym, when he read in his cell, when he made phone calls. Collins wasn't stupid. He knew what Tyson could do. But Collins also believed something that would eventually get him hurt. He believed that boxing was a sport, and sports didn't work in a real fight. He'd said it to his crew more than once. A boxer throws hands, but in here, hands aren't enough. Now I want to be clear about the layout of where this went down because the space matters. On the ground floor of the housing unit, past the common area with the bolted-down tables and the mounted television, there was a short corridor that led to a utility closet and a maintenance door that opened to a back stairwell. Guards rarely walked that corridor because there was nothing back there worth monitoring. The cameras that were supposed to cover it had been broken for weeks. Maintenance requests in a state prison move at the speed of continental drift, so that corridor became a dead zone, a place where deals got made, scores got settled, and nobody official ever saw a thing. Get this. On a Tuesday afternoon in the spring of 1993, Mike Tyson walked down that corridor alone. He was heading to the small room adjacent to the maintenance area where he'd been given informal permission to train. Not a real gym, just a cleared-out space with a heavy bag that a sympathetic guard had helped arrange. Tyson spent hours in there, pounding that bag, doing push-ups, shadowboxing. It was the only thing keeping him sane. He turned the corner and Collins was standing in the middle of the corridor, not leaning against the wall, not passing through. Standing there, feet shoulder-width apart, arms crossed. Behind him, 4 feet back, stood 2 of his crew. A guy named Marcus, lean and quiet, and another man everyone called Boo, who had hands the size of dinner plates. The corridor was maybe 12 feet long and 6 feet wide. The only light came from a single fluorescent tube buzzing overhead, throwing a yellowish wash over everything. Tyson stopped walking. His eyes went to Collins, then to the two men behind him, then back to Collins. He didn't say a word. His hands were at his sides, his jaw tightened. This was a setup, and he knew it before his next heartbeat. "You and me need to talk," Collins said. Tyson took one step forward instead of back. That step said everything. In a space where most men would have retreated or negotiated, Tyson closed the distance by 12 inches. "Talk about what?" Tyson said. His voice was high and quiet. That famous voice people always found jarring coming out of a body built for destruction. Collins uncrossed his arms. "You've been getting special treatment, extra gym time, guards looking the other way. That's not how things work in here." Tyson took another step. Now they were maybe 5 feet apart. "I earned my time. Go handle your business somewhere else." Here's what nobody tells you about the moments before violence in a closed space. There's no dramatic pause. There's no stare down that lasts for minutes. The air changes, muscles contract, and then it happens so fast that the people standing right there can barely reconstruct the sequence afterward. Collins reached for Tyson. Not a punch, a grab. He shot his right hand forward, trying to seize the front of Tyson's shirt, trying to pull him in close where those famous fists wouldn't have room to operate. This was Collins's strategy, his whole theory about fighting a boxer. Get inside, negate the reach, make it a grappling match. Take away what Mike Tyson was best at and drag him into a brawl where size and viciousness mattered more than technique. His fingers closed on fabric. For about half a second he had Tyson's collar. Then Tyson did something that Collins did not expect. Instead of pulling away, instead of trying to create distance, Tyson surged forward. He drove his forehead toward Collins's face in a sharp, brutal head movement. Not quite a headbutt, more of an explosive forward pressure that broke Collins's grip simply because the sudden momentum jerked his hand loose. In the same motion, Tyson's left hand came up from below his waist and sank into Collins's midsection, just below the ribs. The sound Collins made was involuntary, a grunt that came from somewhere deep and primal. His body folded forward at the waist, just 2 or 3 inches, but it was enough. His chin dropped, and that's where Mike Tyson's right hand was waiting. I want you to understand something about Tyson's right hand. In the ring, with gloves, against trained professional fighters, that right hand had ended careers. It had rendered men unconscious in 4 seconds. It had generated punching force that scientists later measured at approximately 1,700 pounds per square inch. Now imagine that same hand, bare-knuckled, ungloved, with no referee and no rules and no bell to save you, thrown in a corridor 6 feet wide where there was nowhere to go. That right hand connected with the left side of Darnell Collins's jaw. The jaw shifted. I don't mean metaphorically. Bone moved in a direction bone is not supposed to move. Collins's head snapped sideways and his legs stopped working. Not in the dramatic Hollywood way where a man staggers back and slides down a wall. His legs simply stopped receiving instructions from his brain. He dropped straight down, his knees hitting the concrete floor first, then his torso pitching forward, and then his face meeting the ground with a sound that made Marcus, standing 4 feet behind, take an involuntary step backward. Now here's where it should have ended. Collins was down. Collins was done. The point had been made, but prison doesn't work on points. Marcus moved. He moved fast, stepping around Collins's crumpled body and lunging at Tyson from the left side. Marcus wasn't a big man, but he was quick, and he had a weapon. A piece of metal maybe 4 inches long, sharpened on one end, wrapped in tape on the other. A shank. He'd been holding it in his left hand the whole time, pressed flat against his forearm where Tyson couldn't see it. Marcus slashed at Tyson's midsection, a quick lateral swipe aimed at cutting rather than stabbing. Tyson's reaction was pure instinct, the same defensive reflex that had been programmed into his nervous system by Cus D'Amato when he was 13 years old. He pulled his abdomen back and rotated his torso, and the shank passed through the space where his body had been a quarter second earlier. It caught the fabric of his shirt and nothing else. Sliced a clean line through the cotton, right across the belly. I swear this happened. Tyson looked down at the cut in his shirt, then looked up at Marcus. And what Marcus saw in those eyes made him do something instinctive. He jabbed again with the shank instead of turning to run. It was the wrong choice. Tyson caught Marcus's wrist with his left hand. Not a gentle catch, a clamp. The same grip strength that had held opponents in clinches against their will in 12-ounce gloves now closed around Marcus's thin wrist with nothing in between. Marcus yelped. The shank clattered to the floor. Tyson didn't throw a power shot. He pulled Marcus forward off balance and delivered a short, chopping right hand to the side of Marcus's neck, just below the ear. Marcus went down sideways, conscious but unable to stand, his legs twitching, his left hand grabbing at the wall for support that wasn't there. 2 men down, elapsed time from Collins's first grab to Marcus hitting the floor, probably 12 seconds. Maybe less. Now let me tell you about the 7 witnesses. Collins's third man, Boo, had not moved. He stood at the end of the corridor, his back nearly touching the maintenance door, and his hands were up, palms out, fingers spread. The universal gesture, "I'm not in this." His eyes were wide and his chest was heaving, but his feet were planted and he made no move toward Tyson. The other 4 witnesses were inmates who had been in the common area and heard the commotion. They'd come to the mouth of the corridor and stopped there, crowded in the doorframe, watching. Not one of them stepped forward, not one of them spoke. 7 people. 7 sets of eyes on Mike Tyson, standing over 2 men in a corridor, with a broken fluorescent light buzzing overhead, and a shank on the floor and a torn shirt across his stomach. This is the part where most storytellers would tell you Tyson went berserk, that he lost control, that the animal came out. And you know what? That's the part everyone gets wrong. Tyson stepped back. He took 2 steps away from Marcus, who was still on the ground trying to make his legs work. He looked at Boo, who hadn't moved. He looked at the 4 men in the doorway. Then he looked down at Collins, who was face down on the concrete, completely unconscious, breathing in short, ragged bursts through a jaw that was visibly wrong. And this is the moment that separates what actually happened from every exaggerated version of this story that's floated around for 30 years. Tyson bent down. He reached under Collins's shoulder and rolled him onto his side. Recovery position. The kind of thing you learn in a first aid class, the kind of thing that keeps an unconscious person from choking on their own blood or swallowing their tongue. Tyson rolled this man, a man who had just tried to intimidate him, who had brought 2 armed associates to corner him in a dead zone, onto his side so he wouldn't die on a prison floor. Trust me on this. That moment tells you more about Mike Tyson than any knockout highlight ever will. Then Tyson stood up. He looked at Boo again. "Get him to medical. Tell them he fell." Boo nodded once, fast, like his head was on a spring. Tyson walked past the men in the doorway. None of them met his eyes. He went back to his cell. He sat on his bunk. He looked at the tear in his shirt where the shank had passed through, and he pressed his fingers against his stomach, checking for blood. There was none. The blade had missed by maybe a centimeter. Now, let's talk about what happened after, because the fight itself was only the beginning of the real story. Within an hour, every inmate in the housing unit knew. Not because anyone announced it, not because there was some kind of prison newswire. People just knew. The way word travels inside a facility is almost biological. It passes through walls, through food lines, through glances exchanged in hallways. By dinner, the population of Indiana Youth Center understood that Darnell Collins had tried to press Mike Tyson and was now in the medical unit with a jaw that needed to be wired shut. Here's the wild part. No guards were ever officially told what happened. Boo did exactly what Tyson said. He told medical that Collins fell down a stairwell. Marcus, once he could stand, said the same thing, and Collins himself, once he was conscious and could communicate through a broken jaw, wrote on a notepad, "I fell." You might wonder why. Why would Collins protect the man who put him on the ground? The answer is prison logic, which operates on completely different principles than anything outside those walls. If Collins admitted that Tyson had beaten him in a fight Collins started with backup and a weapon, Collins was finished. His reputation was gone, his crew would dissolve, every debt owed to him would evaporate, and worse, he'd be seen as a snitch, which in prison carries a price far heavier than a broken jaw. So Collins ate it. He swallowed the loss, literally and figuratively, through a jaw wired with surgical steel, drinking his meals through a straw for 6 weeks. And Tyson? Tyson went back to his routine. Heavy bag, push-ups, books, phone calls. He never mentioned the fight to anyone. He never bragged. He never threatened. He never used it as leverage or currency. In a world where reputation is the only economy, Tyson spent none of his. But the story spread anyway. Let me tell you what one of those 7 witnesses said years later. A man named Jerome Patterson, who'd been one of the 4 inmates in the doorway, gave an interview in 2009 to a small website that covered boxing history. Patterson had been released in 2001 and was living in Gary, Indiana, working at an auto parts store. He said, and I'm paraphrasing closely, "I've been in fights my whole life. I grew up fighting. I fought in prison every other week. I never in my entire life saw a human being move that fast. Collins was a big dude, scary dude. And Tyson put him on the floor so fast that I thought I'd missed something. I thought maybe Collins had tripped. Then I saw his jaw and I knew. And then when he took care of the second guy with the knife, that was it. Nobody in that building ever looked at Tyson wrong again. Nobody. And the thing I remember most isn't the punches. It's him rolling Collins over so he could breathe. That messed me up for a long time, thinking about it. That interview is buried deep on the internet, on a site that barely exists anymore. But the words are there if you know where to look. Now you might be wondering about the aftermath in terms of the power structure. And yeah, it shifted completely. Collins's crew fractured within a week. Boo distanced himself immediately. Marcus, who'd had the shank, actually requested a transfer to another housing unit and got it 3 weeks later. Collins himself, once his jaw healed, became a ghost. He stopped running anything. He stopped collecting. He kept to himself, ate alone, and spent most of his time in his cell. And no one ever tried to test Mike Tyson again. Not in that facility. Not for the remaining 2+ years of his incarceration. Think about that for a second. In a prison full of violent offenders, a place where challenges and confrontations are daily currency, one 90-second fight in a corridor bought Mike Tyson complete and total immunity. Not because people were afraid of getting hit. People in prison get hit all the time. It was because of the totality of what those 7 witnesses described to everyone else. The speed, the precision, the controlled violence that stopped the instant it needed to stop, and then the mercy afterward. That combination, the ability to destroy and the choice not to destroy more than necessary, is the most dangerous thing a person can demonstrate inside a prison. Because it means you're not out of control. You're not emotional. You're not reactive. You're a weapon that aims itself, fires once, and holsters. And nobody wants to be on the receiving end of a weapon that thinks. Let me give you another piece of this that most people don't know. About 3 months after the fight, Tyson was in the common area watching television. A basketball game, if the accounts are accurate. Collins walked in. The room didn't go quiet because most people in there didn't even know about the history between the 2 men. New inmates had rotated in, faces changed constantly. But the guys who knew, they froze, they watched. Collins walked to the row of chairs near the television. There was an empty chair next to Tyson. Collins sat down in it. Tyson didn't look at him, didn't move, just kept watching the game. After a few minutes, Collins spoke. "Your jaw still hurts?" This is real. He was asking Tyson if his own jaw still hurt. In prison, this is as close to an apology as most men ever get. Tyson glanced at him. "I never got hit." "Yeah," Collins said, "I know." They watched the rest of the game without another word. They never became friends. They never became enemies. They became something that only exists in places where men are locked together against their will. They became understood. Each man understood what the other was, and that was enough. You want to know what happened to the shank? The one Marcus dropped on the corridor floor? Tyson kicked it against the base of the wall before he walked away. Boo picked it up later and disposed of it. If that shank had been found by guards, it would have triggered a full housing unit search, lockdowns, possible transfers. Everyone would have suffered. Tyson knew that. Even in the heat of what had just happened, with adrenaline screaming through his bloodstream, he had the presence of mind to kick the evidence out of plain sight. Listen to me. That's not the behavior of a mindless fighter. That's the behavior of a man who understood exactly where he was and what the consequences of every small action would be. Cus D'Amato taught Mike Tyson a lot of things, but Cus also taught him to think, to calculate, to see 4 moves ahead. Most people only know about the fighting part. The thinking part is what kept Tyson alive inside those walls. Let's talk about the physical details of what those punches did. Because medical records exist even if they're not public, and people who work the medical unit have talked over the years. Collins sustained a fractured mandible. His lower jaw was broken in 2 places. He had a severe concussion. His left eye socket had a hairline fracture, likely from when his face hit the concrete floor after going down. He was transferred to an outside hospital for surgery, then returned to the facility's medical unit for recovery. 6 weeks with his jaw wired, another 2 weeks of soft food after the wires came out. Total recovery time, nearly 3 months. Marcus had nerve damage in his neck that took weeks to resolve. He experienced numbness and tingling in his left arm for a long time after. The chop Tyson delivered to the side of his neck had compressed something. A nerve, a blood vessel, the specific anatomy isn't clear, but the effect was immediate and lingering. 2 men, 2 punches each, essentially. That's 4 impacts total if you count the body shot to Collins. And the damage was clinical, surgical, not the wild swinging of a bar fight. The precise, educated violence of a man who had been trained since childhood to hit human beings in exactly the right places with exactly the right amount of force. Here's something else that will stick with you. In a 2005 interview, a former guard at Indiana Youth Center, he went by the name Ray, no last name given, talked about Tyson's time there. He said Tyson was the easiest inmate I ever supervised. He was polite. He said please and thank you. He read books constantly. I'm talking thick books, philosophy, history, political stuff. He worked out every day but never caused problems in the gym. The one thing I'll say is this: everybody knew not to push him. Not because he was loud or threatening, because he was quiet. The quiet ones are the ones you watch, and Tyson was the quietest man in the building. That quiet is what Collins underestimated. He saw the fame, saw the special gym access, saw what he interpreted as preferential treatment, and he made a business decision to confront it. What he didn't see was that the quiet man with the high voice and the philosophy books was the same person who had knocked out 33 professional fighters, many of them in the first round, and that the transition from quiet to violent happened in a space of time so small that human perception could barely register it. Now I need to tell you about one more moment from this story because it matters. About a year after the fight, Tyson was preparing for a potential early release. His legal team was working on an appeal. His behavior record inside the facility was essentially clean. No documented incidents, no formal write-ups. Remember, the corridor fight was never officially reported. During this period, a new inmate arrived on Tyson's housing unit. Young guy, maybe 21, in for drug possession. Small, scared, clearly not built for the environment he'd been placed in. Within his first week, he was being pressured by an older inmate for his commissary. Standard predatory behavior. Tyson noticed. He didn't intervene directly. That would have created its own set of problems. What he did was simpler. He sat next to the young inmate during a meal, just sat there, didn't say much. And when the older inmate who'd been pressuring the kid walked by, Tyson looked up at him, just looked. Held eye contact for about 3 seconds, and that was the end of it. The kid was never bothered again. You don't hear about that in the highlight reels. You don't see that in the documentaries. But the people who were there remember it. They remember that the most dangerous man in the facility used his reputation, a reputation built in that corridor on a Tuesday afternoon, to protect someone who couldn't protect himself. I'm telling you, that's the Mike Tyson story that matters. Not the ear bite, not the face tattoo, not the knockout reels set to rap music on YouTube. The story that matters is a man standing in a 6-foot-wide corridor, handling a threat with terrifying efficiency, then rolling his unconscious attacker onto his side so the man could breathe, then kicking a shank against a wall so nobody else would get in trouble. That's the story only 7 people saw, and now you've heard it too. If this story hit you the way it hit me the first time I heard it, do me a favor. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got more stories coming that you won't hear anywhere else. Stories about the moments that happened behind closed doors with no cameras and no commentators. The real ones. Now let me finish this. Mike Tyson served 3 years of his 6-year sentence. He was released on March 25, 1995. He walked out of Indiana Youth Center and into a world that had spent 3 years debating whether he was a monster or a victim, a fallen champion or a cautionary tale. The boxing world was waiting. Don King was waiting. Millions of dollars in future fight purses were waiting. But none of those people, none of those contracts, none of those cameras knew what had happened in that corridor. The 7 witnesses scattered over time, released, transferred, moved on with their lives in whatever direction life took them. Collins, from what can be traced, was released in 1997. There's no public record of what happened to him after. Marcus dropped off the radar entirely. Boo reportedly ended up in a halfway house in Indianapolis. The 4 men in the doorway went their separate ways. And yet the story survived. It passed from inmate to inmate, from facility to facility, from one generation of incarcerated men to the next, growing slightly with each telling but keeping its essential shape. The shape of a man who was tested and who answered so completely that the question was never asked again. Jerome Patterson, the witness who gave the interview in 2009, said one final thing that I want to leave you with. He said, "People ask me if Tyson was the toughest guy I ever saw in prison. I always tell them the same thing. Tough is the wrong word. Tough is the guy who takes a beating and keeps standing. Tyson wasn't tough. Tyson was something else. He was the end of the conversation." Tyson walked out of that prison in 1995 and returned to boxing. He knocked out Peter McNeely in 89 seconds. He knocked out Frank Bruno in 3 rounds. The world saw the old Tyson, the destroyer, and they thought they understood him. They didn't. Because the fight that defined Mike Tyson wasn't in a ring with cameras and commentators and millions watching. It was in a corridor with a broken light, against a man with a broken jaw and another man with a blade, witnessed by 7 people who will carry it with them until the day they die. Collins hit the ground in under 3 seconds. The whole thing was over in 12. And when it was done, Tyson said 6 words that none of those witnesses ever forgot. Get him to medical. He fell. That's not a fighter talking. That's not a celebrity or a convict or a cautionary tale. That's a man who knew exactly how much damage he could do and chose, in the moment that mattered most, to do exactly enough and nothing more. That's the legend, not built in a ring, built in a corridor, and carried in whispers for 30 years by 7 people who saw it happen. I told you this story was real. Now you know why they still talk about it.